Hello and welcome to your latest edition of the Royal Blue Podcast. I'm your host today, filling in for the out of action Phil Kirkbride and Adam Jones, Sam Carroll. Joining me today, Dave Prentice, Chris Beesley and Connor O'Neill. We're also being filmed today. If you're wondering why I'm wearing a t-shirt, then that's because I started at 3 o'clock on a Friday. Connor, you've got no excuses. You just came in looking... I
got a late call up, so...
A late call to the podcast.
And I never got the memo, hence the red and white shirt. I can only apologise.
You should never wear red, pal.
I know. Well, next time.
Obviously, with it being the international break, there's not a lot of Everton stuff to talk about that we didn't cover in the earlier edition of the Royal Blue Podcast, which is available on Acast if you haven't already caught up with that this week. So I thought we'd start with something a little bit different. Everton's new midfielder, JP Gabaman, conducted a Q&A with the Everton website today. Bees, I think you've done an article on it.
Yeah.
So I thought we'd try some of these questions, and I'll start with you, Preno. Who's the first Everton player or person that you ever interviewed?
I wouldn't mind a bit of preparation time for questions like this. Everton person.
This back in the 40s, 50s?
Yeah, it was Tommy Lawton. No, genuinely, I would suggest it was Howard Kendall's first wife.
Really?
When I worked at the Formby Times, the editor at the time had this bright idea that, so I'd go around and knock on the front door and see if Mrs. Kendall will do a piece about, my life as a football widow, if you like, how she's always left her home while he's sort of up and down the world. So I went round as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, I think it was 18-year-old, 19-year-old at the time, knocked on the door, and she was utterly charming, said more than happy to do the piece, but couldn't do it there and then. Could have come back on another day. So I did, came back another day. She sat down, sort of told me her story, showed me all kinds of little bits of memorabilia around the house, including a £5 note in a glass frame, which had been signed by Brian LeBone. Apparently he was notorious for not paying debts, gambling debts. And when he actually finally did pay one, Howard framed it because it was so special. So it was just like quite a charming afternoon.
Tea and biscuits laid out?
Totally, yeah. I mean, obviously I've been back in that house many times since with Howard, though, so enjoying something a bit stronger than tea and biscuits. Talking about football issues. But yeah, probably the first proper football in inverted commas interview was Howard Kendall's first missus.
What year would that have been around, do you reckon?
1983, 84, around about that era.
Just before
when he was the Everton manager, he was under probably severe pressure at the time as well. And she'll have spoken about that because Argyle Road was the name of the road where they lived. And I remember quite clearly the end of the road being daubed in graffiti, so Kendall and Carter House, his garage doors getting daubed in graffiti at the time.
If only they knew.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. He had to put up with an awful lot at the time and then, clearly turned it all around spectacularly only 12, 18 months later.
Bees, first Evertonian interview.
Yeah, well, at least Dave got me a bit of thinking time there.
I was trying to pad it out.
Yes, of course. But what I'll actually say, it actually reminded me of something. Actually, while we're on this, I'll tell you. Just a slight aside. The first Everton book that I ever read as a child was actually written by Dave.
Really?
I think it was just called
God.
Everton.
Just
I can't remember now.
I didn't even
it was
know
a really
Dave
small book.
Is an author.
I've written about 3 or 4, but
Yeah.
not strictly speaking books in the true sense of the word. I've done a number of collaborations with David France, Everton historical works, which I've thoroughly enjoyed doing. But this was, I can't even remember the publishers now. Again, it was in the 80s.
I think you'd only have been in your 20s, Dave.
Yeah,
when you
wanted
did it.
a book aimed at the children's market, basically, which was a history of Everton Football Club, but designed for younger readers. So clearly they came to somebody whose vocabulary wasn't the most extensive and asked me to do it. But yeah, if I remember correctly, I got weighed in quite well for that. And it wasn't the most challenging bit of work I've ever had to do.
I remember maybe slightly paraphrasing there, but there was some quote in it said that Everton never claimed to be the most successful football team in history, just the best.
I remember it well. Yeah. I've probably trotted that a few times since.
But yeah, coming to my first Everton interview then, I'm thinking, in a similar vein to Dave starting out, as a cub reporter on the weeklies, it would probably have been when I was at the Ellesmere Port Pioneer, and I interviewed Dave Hickson, the Cannonball Kid, of course.
Lovely man.
Yeah, he was true gent. I remember once doing the Everton Stadium tour, and when he used to do that as well, and again, tea and biscuits involved. I think Dave used to serve them up himself, but it would have been with Dave. I remember once we went to visit. We were at a care home where an old lady was 100, and Dave was there once as well. So he was very big in Ellesmere Port at the time, raised in that community. So it would have probably been Dave, and then. First game I did was many years later, was at Sunderland away, but the first actual one,
Baptism of Fire.
Yeah, a last
was it
gasp.
Stadium of Light or the
Stadium of Light. A last minute winner from Tim Cahill on New Year's Eve.
What a game!
Everton got battered. They'd had an awful run that month. They'd had the Derby defeat and the 4-0 at Villa. I don't think they were bottom, but they were really struggling near the foot of the table. I think Sunderland, possibly bottom who they were playing, but Sunderland battered them that day. Nigel Martin pulled them out the fire, and Cahill nicked a last minute winner. So that was my my first game for the paper, but the first Everton interview of any such, would have been Dave Hickson.
Go on, if I can throw a quick Dave Hickson anecdote in here, which brings in Howard Kendall as well, because like you say, he was a lovely fella, Dave Hickson, sort of charming chap. And I got to play in a charity game quite a few years ago now, where Howard was playing, and Howard was still, so reasonably fit. Dave Hickson was playing, and Dave must have been in his 60s, if not approaching on 70. And Dave Watson was our manager that day, so managing Howard. And I'd got a little bit boxed in on the touchline, and so I looked for the easy way out. I just turned. I could see Dave, lurking on the halfway line. So rather than try and keep possession, I just chipped a hopeful ball in his direction. Fair play, Dave Hickson, absolutely willing as anything, went charging after this ball as best a 60-odd-year-old fella can charge. And he took about 7-8 steps, got closer, and then got his legs all tied up amongst themselves and just went flying. Now, I felt really bad about it, but half-time, not half as bad as I felt when I got into the dressing room at half-time, Howard went ballistic at me. Even though Waggy was the boss, Howard just dragged me, and he goes, know your players. You don't chip a ball for a 65-year-old to chase you, dickhead. So, I learned a harsh lesson that day.
A dressing down from Howard Kendall.
Absolutely, yeah.
And Connor, before we come to you, it's a big moment for you. Royal Blue podcast debut.
It is,
while you're on your loan spell at the Echo. So, famous Everton interviews, or first Everton interview, sorry?
Well, I actually done 2 in one day. I've done some work before I started at Reach for the club itself, covering the academy, and I've done Kevin Sheedy, who was under 18s manager at the time, and a lad called Shane Lavery, who scored a wonder goal in Europa League a couple of weeks ago. So they would, and the irony of Kevin Sheedy was he used to give you more off the record when you stopped recording than he did when you were talking to him. So it was kind of, you sometimes wish that you just press record and went through the whole, because he'd give you more off the record than he was on the record. But no, Shane Lavery was probably the first player I ever spoke to, and obviously he was in the headlines a couple of weeks ago for a wonder goal in the Europa League.
You're always looking out for Shane following his career?
A little bit, yeah. Obviously, he was released in the summer, and he's gone back to Linfield, which I've got a mate from university who's at his local club back home from Belfast. So he was obviously talking about him and stuff. And when I seen him, hit the headlines and get the national headlines, it was good to see.
And Dave, on the subject of interviews, then, any Everton figure that you've ever been starstruck by, or awestruck?
Oh well, yeah, early days. I mean, you're basically you come off the terraces, having been an Everton supporter, all my life, and then thrust into a job where you're actually talking to, your heroes. And so, to begin with, you are a little bit nervous, a little bit, sort of tongue-tied on occasions talking to them. I can't think of any one in particular that, sort of particularly, sort of blew me away. I mean, certainly talking about, your first game, I had a moment there because I was let loose at the end of the 86-87 season. Everton had already won the league. I was working for the Daily Post, and I was allowed to cover the final home match of the season against Tottenham. And they were just about to go into the cup final that year, the 87 cup final. And I'd done the game. Everton won 1-0. Derek Mountfield scored the winner, came off the bench and scored late on. And it was very different back then. There wasn't like a post-match press conference. You had to go down into the tunnel and try and grab an interview with whoever you could, so the manager, whichever players you could collar. And I'd filed my report on the whistle that had gone over. I went downstairs, but I was a little bit slow. And David Pleat, who'd named a weakened team because Spurs were playing in the cup final, and there were stories about him going to get sanctioned by the FA over it, was walking down the tunnel. And the national media had already collared him and got an interview with him. Now, I knew they wouldn't give me the lines. I mean, there's real rivalry between the national newspapers and the Echo. Certainly was back then. So I couldn't even have bothered trying to ask them, what he'd said. So I went chasing after him. So, David, can I have a quick word? Yes. Carried on walking. I said, are you worried about getting any FA sanctions, picking a weakened team? No. Slammed the door in my face. That was so I got a one-word interview. Sit with David, please. So not really starstruck then, but so certainly in those early days, speaking to all those players, so I was both in awe and also quite nervous. And then obviously became the Everton correspondent. So after that in the 90s, and I did it for the best part of 8 or 9 years. And it's fair to say the players then became my mates, largely because I was the local newspaper reporter who was going down there every single day. Pre-season tour, used to go travel with them all the time. It's very different to how it is now. And David Unsworth, Graham Stewart, top pals who I see all the time now. Joe Royle came to my wedding. I got very, very close to Joe. Walter Smith came to my wedding as well. So it was very, very different era then. So so initially starstruck, but then they became mates, and now I'm just cynical. So footballers.
Do you not think to just have Walter and Joe as your two best men, to just have your two Everton managers standing behind you?
No. They came to the evening. As did Dave Hickson, funnily enough. And
forgiving you all these years later.
Well, funny enough, Walter said, when I gave him the invitation, he was always a bit put out because I'd only invited him to the evening. I said, well, I don't think you'd come to the day, do you, if I invited you? But he did, so fair play to him.
Bees, any starstruck moments, biggest name you've kind of interviewed?
No, I'll tell you what did come to my mind when Dave was speaking there. A couple of unusual interviews that I'd had when Joe, Brazilian Joe, as it seems we always had to refer to him by, I once interviewed him. It was almost like a double translation. Phil, who does a lot of the translation work at Everton and Liverpool. Obviously, Joe spoke Portuguese, being a Brazilian, and Phil could speak Spanish, but he couldn't speak Portuguese. So it was sort of like I'd ask the questions in English, and then they get put into Spanish, which was Joe could kind of understand a bit, and then he'd reply in Spanish, his second language, and then they would come back to me. So that was an interesting one. Actually, made a good tale. I presume that Phil was actually maybe embellishing some of those answers a bit, making them sound a bit more.
Sounds not the most accurate quotes in the world.
Yeah. And also a bizarre one I had was a couple of seasons ago when Everton had that early Europa League start. Actually ended up taking the Rozombarok manager to task because he turned out he was a Liverpool fan, and I actually showed him a photograph and said, "What's this all about?" And we had a good laugh about that. But it was an interesting interview because it was entirely in Slovakian. What happens at these UEFA press conferences is they're a bit long-winded, really, because again you go through the translator, and I was the only person from the English press who was interested in that one. So basically all these Slovakian journalists came in. They looked a bit like an Eastern European firm when they walked in, and it was just me and the manager. So what they did, Everton brought out the Slovakian translator, and it was this female translator from Slovakia, and I had the Slovakian blonde lady had to whisper all the answers into my ear as the coach was speaking. I was saying some people probably pay good money for this sort of treatment, but it was rather a bizarre interview, I must say. But they got plenty of answers again. So but not awestruck.
I hope Chloe's not listening to this one.
she's a regular listener though. Connor, same question to you.
No real interviews, obviously. I'm still starting out, quite young, but I have been in the press box at Everton and Liverpool, and it is something when you see a manager sat or stood in front of you who's within touching distance for the first time, and you do feel a little bit starstruck almost. And the only fortunate thing for me is I've never been to a big game, so I don't get to see any of the big managers, but it is still a bit of a sight when you first see that that person that you see on the television almost every week, and they were in touching distance of you. It's quite hits you quite where the position that you're in. It
is quite strange, really, isn't it? Because I remember when I was on work experience, Dave, and you and Phil took me to one of Koeman's, what probably was one of his final press conferences, and you are kind of sat there and you're just looking at them, and it's unbelievable, really, that they are, real people in a way who just like us, but have this kind of job in the spotlight.
Yeah, it's strange, so how you do get a little bit, I wouldn't say world weary and cynical, so once you've been doing it for a while, but they do tend to, sort of blur into one after a while, and it is very, very different now. Connor's talking about just, sort of breaking, sort of into journalism now. When I, was his age, starting out, you were embraced by the football clubs probably a lot more than we are now. The local newspaper was always treated a bit differently. And largely as a result of my predecessors' work, likes of Ken Rogers that used to go down to Belfield. He'd ring Howard Kendall in the morning, have a half an hour conversation with him. Then he'd go and have a cup of tea and a sit down, and talk, then. And subsequent managers also embraced that philosophy. So when I started, I was in a quite fortunate position of being able to go down to the training ground every single day. And we were the only newspaper that did it. I mean, the national newspapers could have done had they wanted to, but they had other things to attend to as well. So they tended to go down just once or twice a week. So every morning I'd go down and you'd be taken upstairs into Belfield, into the manager's office. You get a cup of tea, a bit of toast. And you basically talk about what was in the morning papers, so what was correct and what wasn't, and what you could then put out in the evening paper. As a result, you were able to develop, very close relationships with the managers. You could ring them at any time, night and day, to ask them questions, and they would generally answer. And you didn't feel like your journalistic principles were being compromised because you're a fan anyway. So you would write critical stuff, so if the team was playing badly. And like many a time, I've fallen out with Walter over stuff I'd written about Everton, and you just get on with it. When Joe Royal was the Everton manager, and I was a firm believer in what Joe was trying to achieve at Everton Football Club. Yet one of my colleagues, Phil McNulty, had written a series of very critical arguments, and that's because we're a newspaper that we encourage differing views, and so we allowed that to happen. But as a result, Phil fell out with Joe spectacularly. Joe banned the Echo for a while as a result of that. But it was a very, very different world. Nowadays, it's a very controlled environment, where you're invited down to Finch Farm only on, sort of press conference days. And we do get our own separate time with Marco Silva. But again, it's in quite a controlled environment. And you can get 10 or 15 minutes worth of good quality questions to him. But you're never, ever going to have that level of intimacy and friendship, if you like, that you would have had with managers previously. I'm not saying that's for the better or for the worse. It's just very different. But it is. I mean, I've seen some changes in the journalistic landscape.
I was going to say, I was told, Dave, back in the 80s, wouldn't Howard insist actually that they would do Melwood first and then Belfield second, so we could try and top whatever line Kenny had come up.
That was the Nationals. Yeah, he would say to the Nationals, no, go and do Kenny first. And then he'd come and say, right, what's Kenny told you? We'll get that off the back page. I'll top that. He'll give you the better story.
Just rewinding again to that. I've actually thought as we were speaking with the starstruck thing. I remember when Sylvester Stallone came to Goodison Park, and apart from Alan Green, who was obviously find a cynical line about anything, and I think he was rather critical about the area that day, which wouldn't be for the first time. But he seemed to. Like I said, cynical, hard-nosed national newspaper journalists were giddy at the sight of Sylvester Stallone being there. There are pictures of him with the chairman giving it all with the glove and everything. And even the Everton crowd, who can be a cynical crowd many times, I remember them shouting. It could have gone wrong, but they were all shouting "Rocky, Rocky, Rocky" when he
Rocky
came
Balboa,
out.
of course they were.
Yeah, my dad said to me that when you used to go and watch Rocky in the pictures, people would be standing up and going,
"Oh, Rocky films! Rocky films were outstanding." The first,
what's
couple.
the best Rocky? It's got to be two.
The first one. First one, and is it the fifth, the more recent remake that's called Rocky Balboa?
You're a fan?
I really enjoyed
6.
that one as well. Yeah,
6 maybe.
It was 6 actually. Yeah. I mean, they got increasingly silly, didn't they? Sort of 4 or 5 and so on.
I thought 4 was quite good though.
But no, they're great films, and Sly Stallone is just he's a great actor. So he's not given the credit he deserves sometimes because of some of the films he has appeared in. But so he is very, very good. And I loved that the Contender boxing series. I mean, Sugar Ray Leonard did quite recently. Again, a lot of pathos in those in those stories. But it was great seeing him at Goodison Park.
I'll give Preno a break from being put on the spot for this one. We'll start from this end. So, Gabaman was asked what the best moment of his career was. Connor, what's been the best moment of your slightly shorter career than Bees and Preno?
God, probably get a full-time job, to be honest.
Full-time job?
I think for anyone starting out in this industry, it's hard. It's tough going. You've got to. I'm sure you've done it yourself, Sam. Work experience after work experience, and I think when you land your final, your first big job and your first full-time job, it's a big thing, and you got to look at it as a springboard to kick on. So I'd probably say that.
Bees?
I think going abroad with the team and stuff like that. European games. You go some places you'd never go to otherwise. I mean, that's one of the great things about the Europa League, I suppose, more even than the Champions League. The Champions League, you tend to be, at the same big cities and things like that. But yeah, a decade ago, I went to Minsk in Belarus with Everton, and
who was that against?
That was at Bati Borisov.
Okay.
So let's say seeing places like that, or I remember when Everton played Alkmaar AZ, whose stadium I think it was only a year or two old when I went there 12 years ago. Of course, they had very seriously, part of the roof fell in recently, so they won't be playing Manchester United at their normal home ground. But yeah,
They've been beaten by a British team when we.
They had the longest unbeaten home run in European competition, and Everton with a bit of a much changed side that side, because Everton had already qualified for the next round. Actually beat them 3-2 that night.
Big Vic put them to the sword, didn't he?
Louis van Gaal wasn't pleased at all. He described Everton's goals as like comedy capers. But there was a gentleman I met last night that night. Sorry, Franz Mantel, who's remained a close friend and. Contact ever since. He
got you a gift for your 40th
He did.
birthday,
He got me a book token, which had a pun. Treat your shelf to a new book, so it actually sounded Dutch on the actual card there. You said meeting people like that and going to places you wouldn't normally go to. Yeah, I think that'd be the highlight of the job for me. The travel that sometimes goes with it.
Brown, would you agree with that? Going away with the team?
Oh gosh, I was trying to think then, because I had like a bit of time, and just must have been about a dozen different highlights popped up that I said, I'll say winning the cup in '95, because actually reporting on Everton winning silverware was something special.
Yeah.
And I just about managed to hold it together, because that was in the days when you had to dictate copy down the telephone line, and I was genuinely filling up. And I thought, just an emotional moment seeing an Everton skipper, lifting a trophy and being a part of that history. And I thought I got away with it until I got into work on the Monday morning, and Karen, the copy taker who'd been, taking my copy, I told the whole office I was in tears. And I wasn't. I was reasonably composed, but I was close. So I was going to say that, and then I thought, well, actually, no, probably covering the Olympic Games in 2012, which was such a special, occasion.
Yeah.
Doing that for 2 or 3 weeks. Then I thought, well, hang on, I went to the World Cup in '98, and that was like incredible again.
In the US,
in France,
covering
the French World Cup.
Did you see Beckham? Did you see the Beckham kick?
No. This was talking about the athletics, track, the swimming, boxing. Did all of them. Basically, all the Scousers that were down there. Everything, and that was just like a great few weeks. Lived on a houseboat on the Thames for the week while I was down there, 'cause it was a bit cheaper than getting a hotel. That's Reach PLC for you. But no, that was great as well.
Didn't you also have to wake up a Russian journalist ahead of the men's 100 metres final or something?
Because that was bizarre.
He's going to miss Usain Bolt or something.
Yeah, because I'd been at a great seat, great vantage point all the way through, the athletics until obviously the 100 metre final, men's 100 metre final, blue ribbons event. And I'd got there about a couple of hours beforehand. And I'm walking down, and you could see just all the seats are full. And I'm thinking, oh, wow, so what chance have I got here? And I spoke to one of the stewards and said, look, is there a specific seat here? And he goes, any seat that doesn't have this like mark on it, you can sit on. So, right, okay. So I went down, and there was one right near the front. It must have been, like 50 yards away from the finish line. I thought, this is perfect. So I sat there, and there was a seat empty to my left until literally about 20 minutes later, this big, fat Russian journalist came. So muttered something in Russian to me. I had no idea what he was talking, so I just nodded, sat down alongside me, and I fell asleep. So I'm like, right, okay, yeah, all right, fine, so you're obviously not on a deadline to meet. So we're waiting and watching some of the other activities taking place, and then obviously the athletes come out, they're warming up. I'm thinking, only lasts 9.8 seconds. This guy's going to miss it. So in the end, I had to nudge him and wake him up. I don't think he was grateful. He must have something Russian back to me. But it was very, very strange. So yeah, that was a great highlight as well. Many of the pre-season tours, I mean, certainly in the 90s, so I loved going away on them.
Yeah.
Like I say, I was quite close to a lot of those players, so in many respects it was like going away with your mates, sometimes.
Yeah.
Levels of professionalism lacking on one or two occasions, I think it's fair to say. But just great times generally. I mean, I was probably part of, the journalistic sort of world at a good time to cover a football club. I mean, prior to my era, the 60s and 70s, it was even more liberal, and it probably was even better then.
Yeah.
But, so certainly the 80s and the 90s, it wasn't the worst time to be following a football club around the country.
Yeah. I was going to say, Dave, you'd probably been a lot more emotional in 95 if you'd realised it was going to be another 24 years without another one.
Oh, God, yeah. Well, so the weirdest one was 94 when we played Wimbledon. I mean, the emotions running riot that day, it was absolutely incredible. We'd been fielding phone calls all week in the office here from people just wanted some kind of sympathy, so basically they wanted reassurance that Everton weren't going to go down, and we couldn't give them that reassurance. And obviously we'd gone to the game, and we didn't just need to win, we needed results elsewhere to go our way. And like I said, Diamond, Graham Stewart was my big mate, and he told me only about 6 or 7 weeks previously that he was on penalties. We were in the Grapes in Formby, and he said, I guess he was on penalties. And I was going through the list, Unzi, no, so-and-so, no. Me, he says, I know what's going to happen. I'm going to need to score to keep us up, and I won't say exactly what he said, but fair to say that I'll be rather nervous at that particular time. So that was going through my head, so when he walked up to take the penalty kick. Anyway, it was an absolutely beautiful penalty, absolutely buried it. But when the final whistle went, the fans are going mad around the pitch. I still didn't know Everton was safe. It was like, why are they all celebrating? We don't know, because we'd lost sight of the fact because Chelsea were playing Sheffield United, and Chelsea were 2-0 down. We thought, well, Sheffield United are safe now. All the other results hadn't gone our way, and obviously it was before social media, before Sky. So we're listening to radios trying to get what the results were elsewhere. And it was Phil McNulty sat next to me who just suddenly started screaming at me, it's okay, Sheffield United have lost, Chelsea have scored. So then realised I could bark me like paragraph of copy down the phone, go down, and for some bizarre reason I had a programme with me and I made Diamond sign it. The most illegible scroll you've ever seen on the back of this programme, and then I just went out and did what everybody else did and got absolutely steaming drunk.
Do you still have the programme?
I do, yeah, I've still got it at home somewhere with this illegible signature on it.
Bees, to mix it up a little bit then, this was not asked to JP Gabama, this is from my own head. One Everton match in time, if you could go back to and be in the crowd, where would you go?
Yeah, if we're going to be like that, I guess the obvious one going straight into my head is one that obviously Dave went to was the Bayern Munich semi-final.
I thought you were going to be absolutely smart, I said, and say Dixie Dean 60.
I suppose that would have been a good one to pick, though, wouldn't it? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, for all those who were there, by all accounts, say it was the best atmosphere that they'd ever known at the ground, and obviously the magnitude of the occasion, and that would be the one, because it's a strange one for me, because I was around, I was 5 years old, but it was before my football consciousness, so I'm not old enough to remember it from the time. So that'd be the one. That's the first one that came into my head.
Well, I was there, and it was everything you've heard about that night.
Would you go back to that one, Dave, even though you were there, or would you go for the Bees and try and pick up on one you'd never been to?
There's so many you'd like to go to, and the obvious one is Dixie Dean's 60th, so I'd love to, see that and be part of that history. But no, one in my lifetime, if I could go back and revisit again, strangely, it would be the 84 FA Cup final. I've been to Wembley twice previously, 77 and 84 Milk Cup final, seen 0-0 draws. And so, my third visit, and it was Watford. We knew we were going to win. We knew. And I was a young 20-something lad. And so, I deliberately said to the lads we travelled down with, it was one of those monumental weekends, went down in a Sherpa van, which we ended up all sleeping in the back of. But I said before the game, look, we're not going to get drunk. I want to savour it. I want to know what's happened here. I think I had 2 pints before the game because I just wanted to be absolutely aware of what was happening. And Sharpie's goal was down the Everton end, and I've never experienced a sensation like that before or since in my life. A physical shiver ran the length of my spine when that ball rippled the net. And I've told Sharpie this many times since, and it was just an incredible experience. And then obviously, second half, Andy Gray makes it 2. So 20 minutes to go, it was almost like a lull in the crowd because we just knew we'd won. We knew we'd won. And the dawning realisation, you're talking about 25 years of, sort of no trophy. 14 years, as was then, seemed like a lifetime because I was far too young to remember 1970. So I'd grown up getting absolute dog's abuse from Reds fans at school all my life. And so this moment was just so meaningful. It meant so much. And for it to happen at Wembley, it was just a beautiful, beautiful day. Everything about it was wonderful. And then, like I said, the weekend was legendary after that. But yes, I'd love to revisit that again. I'm one of the lads who went down, Kev Dowd. He's 60 in early October. We're all getting together again to celebrate his 60th. So it'll be a good weekend again. Maybe not quite as legendary.
Connor?
As someone who's not as old as Dave and Chris and hasn't got them memories of of the 80s. The game that always stands out, and there's a lot of games in recent years that still stand out, but the one that stands out for me is the Ferguson header against Man United midweek.
That was a good one, though.
You know, the Champions League top 4 season.
Yeah.
You know, that game was just had everything. You know, Rooney was back at Goodison for I think the second time.
Yeah.
They come to Goodison in the January of that season and beat in the FA Cup quite convincingly. We were up against it at the time for top 4, and then when, you know, Ferguson scored the goal at the Street End, when you say a stadium rocks and, you know, so moves, you sometimes think, oh, but I honestly think that night Goodison did move because it was electric. It was electric before the game, but it was when that goal went, it was absolutely electric. And then, you know, Gary Neville got sent off late on.
Rooney's first game back, wasn't it?
Second, it was actually second because he played in the cup tie, I think, in the January. They come in convincingly. Beat us quite convincingly, and I think that was a night where you kind of walked out of Goodison Park thinking we've got a chance at the top 40. And as someone who was relatively quite young then, and I watched Liverpool have a lot of success, you know, it was that moment where you thought we're on the way up here, you know. We've got one over on them, and it was just an unforgettable night.
Well, that atmosphere was everything you've just said, Dan, because, I mean, there's certain atmospheres that stick out in my memory going back down the years. And 94 Wimbledon, that was primeval, the atmosphere that day. Bayern Munich, everything you've heard about it since. But the other, you know, ones that stick out, Fiorentina was an incredible atmosphere that night.
I think the only reason just thinking about it.
I think the only reason Fiorentina doesn't get the sort of credit maybe it deserves is because we crashed out on penalties.
When that Arteta goal goes in, though, even now when you watch it back on YouTube, the way the crowd swells and then the noise kind of still just jumps out at you, doesn't it?
Yeah. But there was that United that you've just mentioned there again, that Chelsea was on a par. And then Chelsea, the cup tie recently, when Lukaku scored that goal, the place just exploded that night.
I think the reason that I always think about it is it was so mean. Like in the end, it was massive 3 points. You know, you look at the Chelsea game, it was fantastic, but we went to Wembley and, you know, massively underachieved that year. Florentino, the way we crashed out, you know, left everyone devastated because there was a belief at one point that season that we were going to win the UEFA Cup. You know,
I think that was one of the great missed opportunities that season.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rangers v Zenit, who we'd already beat.
And you look, you know, we would have played Rangers in the semi-finals of a European competition, who at the time we would have fancied to overcome. And the final was at the Etihad, and it felt a lot like the script had been wrote before. You know, but obviously it wasn't to be. So I think the reason I always picked the Man United game was because in the end, you know, them 3 points were huge, and, you know, we've done something that we've not achieved since. Yeah.
I just remember the Man United game because where we lived on Walton Lane, the players' bus and all the fans' buses had to kind of go back down towards the motorway past it. So if we'd win, my dad used to let me get like my Everton flag and wave it out the window at the away fans going home. And these Man United fans on this little minibus were that fuming. One of them got off the bus and, like, I don't know what he was going to try and do because we were inside the house, and this little, like, gang of scallies just came hand over, and I just remember them going, like, get back on the bus, you fat man. And he just had to turn around and get back on the minibus. One of the best nights ever. The Goslin one as well sticks in my head. That was a good moment. What about then, flip side, Dave? Even for £1 million, what's the Everton game you won't go back to? You would never go back to?
Oh, gosh.
Mine is when we got beat 1-0 at home to Batty Borisov. And it was like the coldest
night in Christendom, yeah.
I just don't think I could relive it. There's a Wigan game, 3-0.
There's been a few traumatic ones you could mention, certainly. My first ever Anfield derby was in '76 when David Fairclough scored the winner, and I went home genuinely in floods of tears after that one. And he reminds me of that lovely fella, David Fairclough, and he reminds me about it regularly now.
Doesn't help that his son Tom works here.
Exactly, yeah. But no, probably from a personal point of view, for many, many reasons, I'd say the Bradford City game in the FA Cup in '97. When you know, it was the end of, I wouldn't say much of an era, to be honest, but, you know, so it was the end of a chapter in Everton's history. Neville Southall was nearing the end, and he got chipped by Chris Waddle from about 40 odd yards. Andrea Kanchelskis was going through the motions and clearly wasn't interested in playing for the football club anymore. Joe Royle was come under increasing amounts of pressure, and I was trying to write as supportive articles as I possibly could at the time, and I was getting quite a bit of abuse from it from, you know, sort of a number of Evertonians. And when that ended 3-1, it was just so depressing, so grim. A couple of journalists in the press box who'd been writing critical articles about Joe, you know, I wouldn't say they were celebrating, but they were, you know, sort of suggesting that they were vindicated, you know, writing what they were writing. And I just felt so depressed. Yeah. I went in the days when we used to have optics in the press room then, and I went and just poured myself a large scotch, which I didn't ever do, and just like sort of necked that. And it really was the beginning of the end for Joe, that.
Yeah.
And, I just think Joe had done an awful lot of very, very good things for Everton Football Club in a short period of time. And in the space of 3 months, it unravelled very quickly.
Yeah.
And Peter Johnson has subsequently said that he realised, he didn't show enough faith in the manager, and he was allowed other outside influences to have affected him.
Yeah.
And he should have been a little bit more resolute. But he wasn't. And, we had this awful scenario, for 2 or 3 years now of managers coming, managers going, Peter Johnson not quite knowing who he wanted to appoint. And it was just a very, very fractured time in Everton's history that could have been avoided, really. But yeah, that's one game I'd never like to see again.
Bees?
Yeah, just following on from that. Yeah, I remember that I was at that game myself, and as Dave said, it unravelled very quickly for Joe. It seems bizarre now that Joe only had one full season at the club. Although he was there for the best part of 3 seasons, just one full season
and finished 6th.
Yeah. Incredible. But we saw the similar sort of thing with Ronald Koeman as well. It unravelled very quickly for him. But so what came on after that? That following season, 97, 98 for me go down as the worst Everton team. And I remember it was a pretty bleak period around then. What proved to be Neville Southall's last game for the club. It was a 2-0. Was it 2-0 at home? And
when he sat on the post?
No, that was
Leeds.
At Leeds. That was 1990 when he was quite unsettled at the time. But a club legend, Everton, best goalkeeper in the world in his pomp, and more games for Everton than anyone else. But it's just not the right way for him to bow out. I mean, you can't always control these things, but that was pretty grim. There, lost 2. I think Everton were bottom of the table then. But we mentioned before that Wigan Athletic game. It was just incredible. Was it 3 goals in about 3 minutes or something stupid? Again, there was a feeling that it could be Everton's they were actually playing really good football towards the end of David Moyes' long reign. Not just the sort of direct football he was associated with, but good and entertaining football. And the feeling is that they would turn over Wigan and get to Wembley. But so it had to be for that to fall so spectacularly flat. And there was just a feeling afterwards that he was letting his contract run down at the time. And as much as he was good for Everton, did a lot more positive things than he did negative. And I think he will have to be remembered as a good Everton manager than a great Everton manager, because there was a feeling after that game that no matter how long David Moyes was going to remain at Everton, they weren't actually going to win something under him. It was sort of like that crystallisation of the thought process at that point. So that was a pretty bleak one. And I remember the weather was pretty rotten. It was quite, even though it was March, it was a pretty cold, wet day as well.
Connor?
I'd have to pick the Wembley semi-final when we were beaten by Liverpool.
Horrible.
I think that we went into that game on a really good run of form. We'd had a really strong sort of second half of the season. They were a total mess at the time.
Yeah.
I know they'd had a good win at Blackburn, I think, on the Tuesday before the game on the Saturday. They come from behind, and I think they scored the last minute winner, but they were there for the taking, and you kind of thought, if this is the one, if we're ever going to do it, if we're ever going to do it, this will be the one. And obviously we got off to a perfect start. Tim Carroll scoring with a calamity goal from Liverpool, and we were in total control. They didn't really threaten first half, and then Sylvain Distin back pass, which I think will live long in the memory of all Evertonians for all the wrong reasons, is pounced upon by Suarez, and then lo and behold, as the clock ticks on 90, Andy Carroll heads one in, and
it was horrible. It was
a numb feeling. It was one of them feelings where you kind of just we were used to losing derbies. We used to being in that situation where, but I think everyone just felt that a little bit more disappointed because of the occasion, the run of form we went into, and it was an early kick-off on the Saturday, and thousands at the bargain. It was just a numb feeling leaving Wembley, and another one of them. It's a massive, massive opportunity missed for the club.
Well, it gets worse, trust me, because that was awful. But the semi-final against Liverpool in '77, I'm not going to revisit it because I still hate it and hate what that man did that day. But to have beaten Liverpool, a great Liverpool team, in a semi-final, and then be robbed by some. I'm not going to swear. By some individual that thought he was bigger than the game. Let's not go there. It does get worse.
We'll quickly move on. Just to finish then, today, probably by the time this podcast is out, I've put together a rankings of Everton's top 10 Premier League transfers since 2009, so for the last 10 years. My top 3, see if you quickly agree with this. 3, Lukaku, we signed him from Chelsea. Number 2, Idrissa Gana Gueye. Number 1, 60 grand, Seamus Coleman. Agreements? Disagreements?
Well, without having time to think about it, but you couldn't argue with Seamus Coleman because of the value for money. But Gana Gueye ahead of Lukaku. No, I think Lukaku more Premier League goals than any Everton player.
Just think Gay. I was trying to encapsulate everything.
Hang on, we're talking Premier League era here.
No, he's last
Just
10
last
years.
10 years. So I was going to say,
Yeah.
where's Tim Cahill?
Yeah,
Where's
sorry.
Mikel Arteta?
Yeah, so
last 10 years.
2009. It's not a lot of great business in there. I'm not going to lie.
Is it more of a damn invader for the bad business the club has done since 2009?
Jordan Pickford and Gylfi Sigurdsson both make the list, so that says a lot.
I'd be flipping Ghana Gay for Lukaku personally, but I wouldn't argue with the,
Ghana Gay for
with the
Lukaku.
individuals.
Well, I suppose both, they made a huge profit on both of them, but I suppose Lukaku was club record signing at the time. It seems bizarre now how that's been dwarfed by the ever-increasing transfer numbers, but at a time when Maraman Fellaini had been the record sign at 15 million, they almost doubled it for Lukaku for 28. But yeah, it was an amazing piece of business, and no matter what you think about Romelu Lukaku, for me, he's head and shoulders above the rest as Everton's best striker in the Premier League era.
Connor?
Yeah, I agree with both lads. I think
You'll have to change this, you know.
You-
I'm going to swap them.
you can't knock Seamus Coleman, can you, for the value for money, for what he's done, for what he's achieved, the way he's bounced back as well since his leg break, everything, and his off the pitch demeanour as well. In an era where we're so quick to slam footballers for the way they are off the pitch and for their antics and what have you, he just seems the moral professional and just a generally decent, nice guy.
He's a top lad.
I mean, I was interested in that. I was talking to someone earlier and they was talking about Roy Keane's latest comments about Man United and stuff like that, and this person said, what makes me think about Keane is he never ever slags Seamus Coleman off. He always praises him, he always bigs him up, and for a man who seemingly knocks anyone who's in front of him, the fact that he even reserves special praise for Seamus shows just how decent the guy is. But no, I go Lukaku as well, number 2. I think I always felt he was undervalued at Everton. I think I always felt he was people who believed that we could just survive and live without him, and I never ever for 1 minute thought that was the case. I always thought he was invaluable, and I think you look at since he's left the club, he's actually proved to be invaluable because no one's ever stepped up to the goals he scored for the club, and okay, the way he left and the way he kind of forced to move out, left a bitter taste, but you can't knock his goal record for the club and what he achieved in a short time.
Probably be nice for Seamus to finish with a trophy, wouldn't it? To go from club icon to club legend.
We'll take the Carabao Cup. Be delighted with that this season.
100%.
And he'd be captain as well.
He is indeed.
Well, I'll just say to finish about Seamus Coleman quickly.
No pressure.
I remember seeing him out of work. I was just at they used to have Christmas family events by the Trafford Centre, and he was there with his young family, just enjoying an evening off. And he was in some sort of shooting range. It was a fairground game to win something. And Seamus Coleman, he's on big money. We talk about the 60 grand transfer fee, but I'm sure he earns much more than that in a month. There's no secret on his Everton wages. He's a wealthy man, and he certainly deserves that. But he'd won a prize on a fairground game for his young daughter, and you could just see the delight in his eyes. This is a man who could have paid for that prize thousands of times over, but the fact that he'd just done that little thing, he'd won that for his young child.
Footballer's competitive instinct.
Yeah, well, I suppose it's that as well. Yeah, they always want to be a winner. But it was just nice just to see him, and he is that nice guy that he is portrayed to be. So yeah.
Well, lads, I think for the International Break podcast, we got through that pretty nicely. I hope you all enjoyed us doing something a little bit different. You can rate, review and subscribe us on Acast. And you can also join the Royal Blue Podcast Facebook group and send us all your thoughts there and on Twitter as well. Thank you to Dave, Chris and Connor. A solid debut from him for joining me. And we'll see you again at the start of next week. Thank you very much and have a great weekend.